Well, howdy there, all of my friends, my peeps. I guess maybe a few enemies too, if you're out there. But family, acquaintances, ladies and gentlemen, adults and children. You know, we live in a world where we're constantly dealing with one another, and it's chaos out there right now. I mean, I should say, if you're listening to the media, you would think it's chaos out there. The truth is a little bit more complicated, but I suppose I should back up and define where I'm at right here. I'm sitting here, it's the 4th of November, 2020. The election was last night, and honestly, I've been kind of checking in to see what's going on. I'm definitely not here to talk about the presidential election, so don't worry about that. And, I've made my points clear on how I feel in the past. At this point, it's the old South Park episode where you're voting for either a giant douche or a turd sandwich. It was the perfect, and that was years ago. It was the best episode to define how people truly feel about voting sometimes. And so, in this case, it's like there's no, it's kind of hard to even want to figure it's a victory on either side. The bigger picture is the corporate autocracy that is America. While people are distracted with the election, there are many other measures being passed. One of those was 110 in Oregon, which I was surprised it passed with the margin it did. It was like a 60-40 margin of voting yes to decriminalize all hard drugs, basically. You can walk around with a personal amount of anything, cocaine, amphetamines, heroin. I know people completely think this is off the rocker, a ridiculous idea. But trust your neighbors, okay? We've had issues with addiction for so long, and locking people away in jails merely because we don't have the treatment facilities or we don't care, it doesn't help the problem. It exacerbates the problem. There's just as many drugs in prisons as there are out of the prisons, okay? So it's not getting rid of any drugs. And as soon as people get out, they're right back to where they were before. So 109 passed as well, which is decriminalizing, or actually they legalized. It was the first state to legalize psychedelic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. They can now be prescribed by, and I'm not sure how the details are going to work on this, but it's going to be hopefully available to people who have PTSD or any type of mental illness where they can take it under the proper, I'm sure that there will be observational people that will need to be available, and it will probably end up biting into the healthcare system for a while. The idea is hopefully that people can just do it on their own after they've realized and done this in a medical setting. And psychedelics help people reset their minds to remember that as a civil society, there, like kind of the idea of the Civil War, there's no such thing as a civil war, right? Oxymoron, I guess. But we have this idea that let's just say that with what's going on right now in this country, with the election, a lot of people think this is going to be over soon. Say, the issues that we're facing, if their candidate wins. And it's really ridiculous when you think about it. We have this COVID problem, which is not going away. Now, I've had a lot of time to think about this. In the very beginning, I supported a short lockdown, wearing masks and getting this thing out of here. But we couldn't comply, and not only that, but we couldn't organize and agree on what to do. So therefore, we failed long ago. It means that I do not believe in any type of lockdowns now. So for all those who in the beginning said, no, they should never tell us what to do, and they're draconian measures, and I agree with that 90% of the time. Now, if there's a huge outbreak in one community, and then let's say I think it was the Hasidic Jewish community out in New York, which they just have different customs. So they were more exposed, larger gatherings, and they had a huge outbreak, and so they felt like they were being singled out because, they were Jewish. There are many different, like poorer communities feeling like they're being treated worse than, say, the wealthy who can do basically whatever they want. I'm not going to get into that, but right now, when people think, well, COVID's no big deal, it is a big deal. Whether it exists, whether it's dangerous or not, because of where we're at. So forget about the disease itself for a minute. Let's look at the economic impact of the stupidity that our government has placed upon us. Now, I totally understand with abiding by certain procedures in order to keep your business open and to function. It seems that people can't even comply with this. Therefore, we have this institution and government kind of argument between one another. Meanwhile, the giant corporations have been running on just fine. So if anyone's saying that this whole COVID thing is going to collapse our economy, of course, it probably will at least collapse the economy of the poorest and even the middle class, which have been... I feel like I'm kind of getting off topic, but, like Aldous Huxley and George Orwell with 1984. Aldous Huxley would quote 1984, and he talked about it when he talked about Brave New World, which was the book he wrote about the dystopian future, where we're basically just mindless citizens, and we all take what they call soma. Soma is the pill that just makes you complacent. Everything's fine. You just do what you're told. Now, it's been a long time since I've delved into those stories, but let's just say that these dystopian futures have come true partly because we've chosen it. We are staring at our phones. We never could have looked at the pill. We never realized. We thought, well, maybe pharmaceuticals. I mean, of course, we do take like 80% of the pharmaceuticals in the world, even though we're 5% of the world's population. We take 80% of the world's opioids, and we're 5% of the population. Americans consume a lot, and a lot of drugs, and a lot of psychotropic drugs. And the wealthiest countries tend to have the highest levels of depression. Why is that? It's really interesting when you think about it. Maybe money can't buy happiness, right? The old cliche. But the biggest issue right now is not... It's the fact that by the time December is over, 25 to 35 million Americans might have lost their home. And at least they'll have nowhere to go. We already have half of the homeless in Southern California, in the country right now. I believe it's about half live in California. And you can blame the government, call it Democrat, make it a political issue. The point is, it exists. We have problems. It's not going to get better by pointing fingers. We have a nation. We have to take care of each other, right? There are many, many reasons which California is a huge part of this problem, but they're not the only ones. In the South, people just live in poverty in a lot of areas, and they're totally neglected by their states. Places where people, have great intentions and want to work hard, but they're basically just kind of left out and isolated by their own government. And then when election time comes, all of a sudden these politicians fly in, they land, and they come out and tell you how great they are and how they're going to help you bring back coal, or you're going to bring back your steelwork jobs, or automotive industry, and then nothing. It's all just empty promises every time, regardless of who's president, because those jobs aren't coming back. Because times change. But we're being lied to. And this is the biggest problem right now. We're being lied to by everyone. There's this old, Plato talked about philosopher kings. He believed that kings must be philosophers, basically, in order for society to thrive. And then along comes Kant, and he totally disagreed with that. He's like, no, not philosopher kings. Kings don't need to be philosophers. They just need to be honest. The philosophers just need to be called upon. And I don't think of a philosopher as a guy who sits there behind books just pondering life. Philosopher by term is a lover of wisdom, and there are people in our society who are experts at what they do and what they know, but there are also people who are just generalists and understand society and people. Some of us strive and gravitate towards those things, and that's what I'm fascinated with. I've listened to many different ancient philosophers and modern and derived my own conclusions, right? It's not about glamorizing any one belief system. And that's why most philosophers can't belong to clubs, or don't. A lot of people who are deep thinkers don't belong to any real groups or structured organizations or religions or anything. And this is a good thing. This is why philosophers are the best people to ask for opinions on issues, because they're not trying to gain something from it or make a dollar, and they're not going to lie to you because they want to be honest. Integrity is much more than we give credit for, and we just laugh at people now who are honest. Like, what a fool. He should have been a better liar. He would have got into office. It's like, oh my God, is this the world we want to live in? Really? I mean, but do we have a choice? I mean, when 30 million people lose their, I don't know if I mentioned that yet, but 25 to 35 million people are expected to be kicked out of their homes. So with that number, and you consider, how are these people going to exist and thrive? They sent us a $1,200 check, right? We didn't get ours, by the way, but people got a little bit of money, and then the government just bailed out. Where did the rest of that money go? It went to the airline industry. Not to the people who work in the airline industry, by the way. It went to the airline industry. It went to bailouts for multinational corporations and a variety of institutions that have no bearing. You know, when this whole thing started, do you remember Trump brought a bunch of people out on stage and he's like, we've got the best corporate people out here. It was the guy from MyPillow and a bunch of other people from these various other corporations. I think Target and Walmart. And I thought, you know, what the fuck does this have to do with the issues that we're facing as a country? You know? Well, it has everything to do with it. They've been the ones running it from the beginning. You know? So, the idea that one president's going to win and anything's going to change, no, of course not. It's going to take a lot of time. If people want to change, it's going to have to be an improving of education. And I hate to say this, but America has fallen to like 30th in advanced nations for education and for child mortality. We're something like 20th or worse. And just think about that when you consider the nation that prides itself on being the best is, there's 20 nations who their babies survive at a better rate than ours. But the point I want to make here about dishonesty in politics is that dishonesty is always for short-term gain. We lie about something because it's the 2-week rule. If you can lie for 2 weeks, it's just forgotten about. Truth is always buried, right? Look back through Nixon, you know, all the different scandals through history and the ones that we don't even know about. It's for short-term gain to look good for usually a re-election, but in the long term, it hasn't really improved our society. Our infrastructure is still falling apart. People still can't get insurance. People still have horrible insurance, or bad health care, or pay too much for drugs. When every other nation pays less for certain drugs, and all of a sudden Americans, we just pay more. It's a premium. It's the American premium. And then we outsource everything. All of our drugs, all of our jobs, all of our, materials, and here we are, suffering because of this. And now we're going into the winter. The world's going back into lockdown. And I'm sitting here thinking, what exactly is it going to be like in December when we're at the extreme peak of this second wave of COVID? Because I know there's still people who just say, it doesn't even matter, it doesn't exist, it's just like the flu. The only person who ever said it was just like the flu was Trump. Okay? He's the one who told people this. Recently, when those recordings came out, where he said previously he'd been interviewed by, I can't recall who it was, but he said it's not like the flu, it's worse than the flu, it's airborne, and it's really nasty stuff. I mean, these were from the words of the president. He was saying this in an interview. The astounding ignorance it takes to not admit that he was the only one spreading this misinformation is, to me, just ridiculous. We have a few fringe doctors saying it's no big deal. Then we have a 90% of the medical community, nurses in tears. And what, are they all actors? Again, I mean, it's just getting ridiculous out there. And the internet has completely twisted our minds into this. I don't even know really if this is going to end well for us if we continue to believe everything we see. There are so many false stories being passed around right now. It is absurd. And it's liable to get people hurt, And we're choosing this. Don't forget this. Well, it's a constitutional failure that we have right now. Basically, the last thing I'd like to talk about here, I guess, would be censorship and how we got to the fact that from many different angles we can't talk about certain subjects, people get silenced, but we've also come to accept that we really don't have a voice with our government. You can write your senators and your Congress. Like back during the 2016 Kratom scare with the DEA, we were writing senators and congresspeople, and a lot of us learned about when you actually send a letter, it just goes to some anonymous email and they never reply. It's like somebody reads it, for them, but they never relay the information unless you have power in numbers. And we do have power in numbers. And I think a lot of us want the same thing, which is just to be left alone to do what we will. I mean, our government has been intrusive for far too long. We have allowed ourselves to become coddled like sheep, as like everyone says. I hate that term, but it's really true. I mean, it's even worse today than it ever was before. And we've willingly taken the pill. The cell phone is what everyone stares at. That's what we're doing. That's what a lot of you are probably doing right now, but it's okay because you're watching my channel, so it's cool. But I'd be curious after the election to see what really happened with a lot of these measures in other states. I know D.C. decriminalized mushrooms too, and there are a lot of spots where there's hope. That's the point. But I'd like to say it has to happen at the state level. It's like having a daddy, the whole federal government. You know, at some point you need maybe somebody to protect you for a while, but once the states can handle themselves, we can work together. We can still have a military if we need one. But do we need a standing army in today's world? Maybe. I mean, if technology failed, if there was a giant EMP attack, a lot of our technology wouldn't work, let's say. Then people would be glad to have an army, but then again, everybody in America's armed. So, you know, it's up in the air. It's six one way, half dozen the other, or whatever they say. But, you know, but here we are with the election. I guess I can't say enough about how I'm not a Biden supporter. It's just absurd, the whole democratic process. And our forefathers, I think it was Jefferson that warned us, if we get to the point where we're at a two-party system, then we're doing ourselves a great disservice. We're doing harm to our Constitution, and that it will just be competing interests whispering into one ear or the other. You know, it's been that way for a long, long time. Even Nixon started the drug war for profits, to keep people in prison, to make money a different way. It's fascinating story of U.S. history, the real story of U.S. history, and a lot of people choose to believe the fairy tale that we've been this great nation that just helps people around the world. But the grim reality is starting to come to the surface now. Our federal government is incompetent to take care of its people because it was never intended to do that. The school system is failing because it was never intended to create educated philosophers. It was intended to create workers for factories. That's why it started. Everything around us is just enough to keep people happy. The opiate of the masses is being able to basically just exist. All the different pleasures and consumptions we have. And we don't have to talk about anything controversial. We don't have to get in too deep. We don't have to worry about the fact that we've been in Afghanistan for 20 fucking years. And that at the beginning it was just, there's weapons of mass destruction. We're going to get in and out and shock and awe and beat them. That was, of course, in Iraq. But point being, the U.S. has never been about the people. Okay? This is important to realize as an American, and a lot of people don't. Your federal government has always had the interests of corporations. And those corporations do not have your interest at heart. They answer to the shareholders. It's such a simple, obvious, a system, but people really don't look deeper than what people tell them. And that's why propaganda works. And that's why we're facing an election right now where it's really hard to even give a shit who wins, honestly. But it's important that we still pass a lot of these measures and that we do care. And, I go back and forth on these things. I have my whole life. I ain't voting. I'm voting. I'm not voting. I'm voting. It's hard. It's really difficult. It's an ambivalence. The cognitive dissonance. I love to use those terms together because that's how it feels. I'm ambivalent, which means, in so many different ways, I cannot figure out what is the right answer to the big questions. And that's what I consider to be a successful approach. Because if I assume I do know, then I've already, made my judgment based on my biases. It's important we realize that. So we'll see what happens. Maybe by tomorrow. I mean, at this moment, what is it? Trump has 213 counted electoral votes, and Biden has 237. That's what they say. Who knows? At the last minute, anything can happen. Trump could come into office and just totally, rip past him. It's getting to be a narrow margin, so we're going to see what happens. But, I know a lot of people are going to revel and rub it in the face of the other people. My guy won. My guy won. I'd just like to say, for once, can America just win? Talk to y'all later. Be well.